today's main topic is about finding your voice. So all together now. I wish I had a good voice.
We're
and
still
could make that
working
a little
on it.
better.
We all wish that about ourselves.
So how do we find our voice? How do we make sure that the work that we're putting out actually sounds like us? So let's start with this question. Do you feel like you've found your voice in your creative work? And how much do you feel like you've found your voice? So Krista, let me start with you. As you're creating your work, how much do you feel like your work looks like you? How much have you found your voice in your work?
I think like it's surprising how much naturally comes through when just even without thinking about it. Like there are elements of you there that you pick up from what you look at in the world, what interests you, what you care about, and all those what no matter the media, whether it's visually or in words, like I think all the time we're soaking that up, and it's really cool to recognize that coming out in your work. So I definitely recognize that happening a lot.
Okay. What about you, Tom, since you're making eye contact with me? How much do you feel like your work really sounds like you and that you've found your voice at this point?
I feel like I found it pretty well. It was a, I think sort of the wishy-washy answer here is that I think that's an ongoing process. Like I don't think you ever like fully arrive at I am 100% this is my voice, because your voice evolves. But I think I have reached a stage in my creative process and career where I feel like I do have a Tom voice. Like
people can recognize.
I could write something and put it out there in the world, and people who know me would be like, "That's something Tom wrote."
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think over the past few years I've found mine. I think for a lot of people, this was true for me for a long time. They get frustrated because you hear the advice, just be yourself. Just relax and be yourself. And I think that's frustrating for people who don't really know who they are, and they haven't really approached that time where they feel like they've come into their own and really can command themselves in that way. And I don't feel like I hit my stride until after 40. And so that's, for a long time I thought that was tragic. And what I'm finding is that that's just true of a lot of people, and that's just how it is. And so there's a fluency that I think you find by showing up and doing the work. And I feel like it's like learning a new language. With your voice, you're learning new phonetics and new syllables, and over time you become more and more fluent, and you become known for that. And I think that fluency really starts to give shape and give form to your voice. And I think it's a cross section of what your passions are and what you're interested in, combined a little bit with what other people can take away from that, unless you're talking to yourself, which is true some of the time.
Patrick shared a Miles Davis quote on Facebook that aligns with that pretty strongly. It was like,
sometimes you have to play a long time to play like yourself, is what Miles Davis said.
Yeah,
and I think
I like that.
It's so true. I mean, I guess I hadn't thought of it with your voice, finding your voice kind of being like its own language, right? If you think about how you learn language as a person, you watch other people talking, you watch other people moving through the world, and then you start experimenting with your own vocal cords and mimicking and mimicking and mimicking. And as you continue to mimic, then you build this vocabulary that you can then use to create original thoughts and ideas as well. So thinking about your own voice as kind of a language that comes from you is a really interesting way to look at it. And it does play very much into this idea that you have to keep using your voice and keep using your voice and keep using your voice to get to the point where something original actually comes from you.
I really like that metaphor of language. I think like another thing that brings up for me is like the idea of like you learn vocabulary and you learn grammar and you build these things that kind of widen what you're able to say and the nuance with which you're able to say it. And then what do you do with this? So it's like that's one component. And then the other component is what do you say? And I think that like they are interwoven, but you can always like in that moment you can always find something to say within yourself if you look at what you have within you. And then as you progress in your life, in your career, your ability to say that just gets better and better.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I think has helped develop my voice is what I'm able to say under pressure. Because when you have a time constraint or a resource constraint, you very quickly discern what matters in the moment, and you don't have time to make it perfect, like we've talked about. You don't have the luxury of stepping away and stepping back to it too many times, and that pressure will show you where your real passions are. And I think that's one component. Another component is, I think when I started to find my voice was when I stopped trying to make that voice something for other people to meet their expectations. That was absolutely critical and groundbreaking for me.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say. Almost in support of the statement, just be yourself, which I think, for different people, they need to be challenged in different ways. And I think challenging yourself to stop thinking about what are other people thinking, or what's the proper way to do this. Like, these people do it this way, so obviously that's the right way to do it. Or what you've been taught, this is the structure of a song. This is the structure of how you write. Here's conventions and all these things. And when you put yourself in all these, under the pressure of all these barriers of what other people have done or told you, or what you think people are going to think, like, I think for some of us, the challenge is letting all that go and just being you, so to speak, and believing that that is enough and that your voice in and of itself is interesting. I think a trap people fall into is they say, I don't have a truly original idea, so I'm going to sort of start emulating these things other people have done and make sort of my own little variation on what other people have done. And that'll be, I'll just micro improve something. And that's, whatever. But I think what that sells short is your voice that's uniquely you, because it is you, it is unique. It in and of itself is almost like its own idea. Like, the way that I talk about something when I'm doing writing, which is my craft, is different than the way everyone else does it, because it's coming from me. And so that in and of itself is almost its own idea. Mm-hmm. And so, like, believe that the way you would instinctively say something is valuable.
Yeah, I was going to say it's inherently valuable for that.
Do you think that an element then of finding your voice is, I don't want to necessarily use the term self-love or confidence, but there is this sense of like valuing what's inside you, and having this sense of self-love, self-appreciation, self-confidence that allows your voice to come out?
To me, it feels like a mix of like that and what I just said, and the thing Mark said earlier about finding yourself. It's sort of like, you have to spend enough time with yourself, and like Miles Davis is saying, to kind of get an idea of who you are, and then you also have to give who that is the respect to come out. And I think a large part of that in today's world is, you're never going to find your own voice if you exist completely buried in everyone else's voices. Like, stop with all the input for a bit, and your output's going to start sounding a lot more unique, because we do inherently start mimicking the things that we're taking in. That's just the way our minds work. If any of us go to the South for a week, we're going to develop
new wrinkles
a
in our
little
brain.
twinge of accent and catch ourselves doing it. I mean, like, that is a silly thing that I'm suddenly doing. Like, I do not possess this accent. Mm-hmm. I think it's the same way when we, read other people's work and watch other people's shows and listen to a bunch of music and then try to make our own piece of music. Like, we are subtly and unconsciously influenced by these things, and that's what starts to come out. And if we take ourselves out of the input stream for a bit, the output stream is going to be much more us. I think, from what I know about Krista, I feel like, part of why her voice journey is going well is because Krista has a healthy isolation from so much input. And so she has, she spends a lot of time outside. She goes on hikes. She wanders around the forest or does whatever fairy life thing that Krista does. But she has time to be in her own mind and understand who she is and hear her own thoughts.
I feel like we're developing Krista's bio really well today. Krista, a visual land with a healthy sense of isolation.
Lost in the fairy forest.
Lost in the fairy forest, yes. Willingly lost.
One thing that we talked about when we brainstormed about this originally was this idea that getting to know your own voice has to do with leaning into genuine parts of yourself without a fixed goal. Often when we attach a goal to something, or whether it's monetary, whether it's amount of production that we're doing, when we attach a goal to something, at least initially, I think it does kind of pull us outside of going deep into these genuine parts of ourselves. So we have to find a way to be exploring some of these deep, genuine parts of ourselves without having it attached to an outcome.
That's exactly where my mind was going too. The sense of exploration into places that you haven't been, in the places that are uncomfortable, is where you're going to grow. It's where you're going to gain that fluency. If you're doing the same things you've always done, you're not going to gain anything. You're not going to grow. You're not going to learn, and you're not going to add vocabulary, so to speak, to your voice. You have to explore. And so the exploration part of it, I think, is absolutely critical. And I think it's okay to have the goal to just explore, right? Not to necessarily have like, well, I'm going to become great and I'm going to have this outcome. I think you can set high standards for yourself, but you have to learn the nuances and you have to walk the paths first.
Well, and to maybe have your goal be something personal. Or find a way to take the goal and make it personal. Bert in the Outpost Community says, I have to tap into painful memories and emotions, the real grotesque places in my soul.
Ew.
You're gross, Bert. Along with a determination to reveal some beauty and hope. So, his voice is inherently happening because he's dealing with things that are him, that are of him, that involve him and his intentions and who he is. And so the voice just naturally presents itself because it's not about what are these people going to think or what's going to be good in the eyes of the beholders and what's going to be, he makes it personal. And so what comes out is unique.
It has to start within, otherwise you're responding to other people's output, right? There is a merging of those circles, right? Like, so your voice comes from within and it's something that you're sharing, right? That's what the voice is. It's something that goes out. So what is the highest benefit for others, or what do I love? What am I passionate about? And what about that is worthy of of sharing, right? Like what would be in this for other people? And I think if you can find that sweet spot, I think you can start conversations and have dialogues and have mutual growth that I think is really beneficial and very significant.
When we're working with brands and helping to come up with brands' core values, there are exercises that we do to help them figure out what adjectives best describe them. Have any of you done that for yourself? Have you ever, do you have like specific words that are your voice and how you kind of came up with those at all?
Not in the same context, not in, I've not done those same exercises with myself. I've done them in the context of the workplace before. I did the Dale Carnegie program with a previous employer, and, that's something that you do for yourself, and it was illuminating. I do variations on that. I journal and things like that, but I don't have the nice solid list of things that I can point to and say this, this, and this.
I do. Mine are optimism, determination, and snacks. Those are like my three kind of core values that I find going through. And I just did on my own a very similar experience to what I do with brands, is I just kind of started writing down all the words that I thought kind of described me and then grouping them into like, okay, these are all pretty similar. These are all pretty similar. And this one is probably the one that makes the most sense. But as somebody who works in social media, kind of had to do that as I'm trying to figure out my personal brand, right? How am I going to continue to speak in a way that people will recognize as me, that will build trust and legitimacy over time? And it had to be by establishing some of those core values for my own voice.
So there's the determination to get the snacks and then the optimism after you've consumed the snacks.
That there will be more.
Yeah, and I also feel optimistic that no matter where I go, I will be fed snacks. And it has never failed me. It really hasn't. So here we are.
I got nothing.
She brought her own snacks today, so
That's true. That's helpful.
no matter where she goes, she's given snacks by herself.
It's interesting. I don't know if I do enough discipline in this area. I'm pretty disciplined in many areas, but analyzing myself and maybe documenting, occasionally I'll do like these are the keywords I'm focused on for this year.
Yeah.
Buoyancy was one year. And I like that challenge. I don't know if I'm really self-aware enough or self-actualized enough to really bolster that to its potential. Maybe that's something I can work on.
We've had these conversations we've talked, we've done personality exercises. I got really into Enneagram last year, but never really specific to voice and to expression, which is interesting.
There is a point of this for me that is where I have to get alone and I have to remove myself from distractions and find out and listen to myself first. So I think a lot of times before you speak your voice, you listen to your voice. And if you don't, then I'm not sure where that's coming from, right? So you have to get into the quiet. I do it a lot with a sketchbook. I listen to instrumental music or orchestral scores or whatever I do. And I think those places are very critical for formulating that path or setting your trajectory. At least they have been for me. I don't know. What do you guys do?
I know that in order for my outward voice to be genuine, I do have to first focus on my internal voice. It's the very first thing that I can practice and control, really, is what my thoughts are when I'm talking to myself. So if you know me very well, I speak out loud what my thoughts are a lot of the times, and usually if I mess something up, my response is, okay, great, here we are. We're doing really good. We're doing awesome. You can handle this. Okay, let's go, Lacey, And so that is, we think we're so complicated as people. We think we're so complex. But like really, those three values of mine, optimism, determination, and snacks, sincerely are the map of all my thoughts. I mean, really, all my reactions, it is in line with three little words. I'm not as complex, and I don't think you all are either. No offense.
I'm pretty simple. That's a very interesting question. I think a fun, accompanying question is, how do we know when we're using our voice?
Yeah.
Like, how do we know when we're working on something, an illustration, some writing, a game we're making, whatever? Like, when are we using our voice? How do you identify, I'm putting something on right now versus this is truly me?
Does that feel like me? Does it have my signature? Does it have my touch?
Yeah, how do we know?
Because my first thought is, there's not words, but there's feelings and faces that I make. If I hear something that I say that sounds like me, I'll often smile, I'll have, or laugh. If I hear something that doesn't sound like me that I've said, which happens often too, there's this little bit of lip curl and twinge, and my head kind of goes back oh, no, that wasn't it, I don't know how to describe it other than those kind of reactions, this kind of leaning in when I hear it back to me, or this leaning out that happens if I feel like it's not in line with my voice.
I think that's a really good description. How does your body respond to it? How do you actually feel and tuning into that? And I think a lot of times we try and ignore our reactions to things, ignore our innate emotions. And I guess if we listen to that, then it can reveal some of those things oh, how does this feel to me?
Like an opening or a closing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The more fluent you become with your voice, I think the less tolerance you have for when it doesn't feel right. I think you become more and more attuned to it. I've seen a little bit of that with me over the past few years. It's no, it's not right. It's not, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it doesn't, something about it doesn't feel right. And I think that voice needs to be listened to, it needs to be heard and and responded to. And I think a lot of times we ignore that voice because of other urgencies, and maybe we need to rethink that.
Yeah. I think the thing that I notice the most for myself for when I'm in my voice tends to be like how quickly I'm moving. So like if I'm working on something, if I'm writing something and it's going really slow and I'm having to like stop and rewrite every sentence 5 times and like I'm really thinking about it, then, you know, unless I'm doing something that isn't really my voice, like this is a piece of work copy or something like that, like that's different. But generally speaking, I'm able to look at that and say, okay, the reason this is taking me so long is because I'm trying to do something that in my head I have set as this thing that I need to do. And, you know, it's not meeting some weird, obscure star that I've put out there to you know, it needs to feel like this. But when it just is pouring out, and it's like, okay, this is 100% natural and I don't even have to think about it. I'm thinking more about the thoughts and rushing to the next thought, and like my fingers can barely keep up. Like that's when I know, like, okay, I am really speaking with my own voice right now, because my own voice comes naturally, and everything else I have to stop and think about, and because it's not my voice. But you know, when we're in a group and we're talking, it's not super laborious to figure out how to say the next sentence because you're just talking in your own voice. And I think when we're being creative and we're using our own voice, it can feel the same way, whether you're writing or designing something or doing a piece of art. Like if it's just falling out of you, like speaking is, I feel like at that moment you're in your voice because it is so natural.
Another view, too, I agree with all of that. I think sometimes for me it doesn't feel like my voice until I'm on the 8th iteration.
Yeah.
Like it needs refinement. Like I'll feel like I'm in a good space, and I'll design something, or I'll sketch something out, or I'll write something, and I'm like, this is headed in the right direction, but it is clumsy and awkward, and I hate it.
Well, my spills are very clumsy and awkward.
Right,
but
well, that's what we do. We're
Mine are
clumsy and
actually
awkward.
uber graceful.
my voice, my true voice,
Right.
is terrible. It's just, then I have to fix it.
Yeah, so I feel like the components that we've kind of flitted about or flitted around are, reflection. So we had a podcast recently about reflection. So reflecting on our work, iterating our work, intentionality going into it, and listening, right? So being able to really listen to ourselves without as much input. If that means we have to go fairy frolic through the forest, perfect. Whatever we have to do to kind of find that space of quiet, develop that intentionality, reflect and iterate, reflect and iterate.
Iterate is right. You show up, even if it's terrible, even if it's bad, just show up and do the work every day. There's something to be said about volume, right? Like you're going to hit something eventually, the more shots you fire. So
How would you describe your... It's very frolic. It feels wrong. How would you describe your relationship to going out into the world?
I guess it's a sense of like just openness to whatever is there. Like I'm not trying to bring something to it. I'm not trying to, force the situation to be any certain way. I just have this openness and emptiness, and I guess when you bring that to things, then you have the ability to really be touched by the things that you interact with. Like if you have constant input from all these things that aren't very important to you, then it all kinds of gets washed out. But if you have this space of silence, and then you can really be moved and really be touched by the things that resonate with you the most.
I aspire to be you so much.
I know. Can I be Krista? She's the best of us.
Yes.
Well, if you want to hear more from Krista, the best of us, then you'll have to come back again soon. I think that we could probably talk about this for another 5 hours and not find our voice.
Or we would lose our voices.
Good point. Very good point. So is there anything else that you all want to hit on before I wrap us up?
No, I feel like we've learned the lesson that in the future these shows really just need to be us asking Krista questions.
Yes, I agree.
And then just sitting on the floor and listening.
Yes, I agree.
And then nap time and snacks.
Mhm.
Okay, well, if you have enjoyed sitting on the floor listening to Krista, we would love to hear from you about what you enjoyed about this. You can follow us here, subscribe, you can leave us a review, you can find us and talk to us in the Outpost community on Facebook. Also, our Discord channel is open and there's a thread in there for the Outpost. We're going to be continuing to record these episodes regularly, and we usually put questions into those groups to get some feedback that we can include in the podcasts. So we adore you all. We're so grateful for you listening to us and hanging out with us for a little while, and I'm obviously grateful for all three of you sitting on the couch with me for a while.
It's obvious.
It's obvious. I'm grateful. All right. I love you. I love everyone else. We all love each other. I love my berry scone.
Honestly,
Let's be real.
I was hoping that we would all just let that hang and, and be deeply awkward. It's like, I love
But
you.
Barry Scone is always there.
And,
for her.
okay, no response is coming. Okay, bye.
This is going to be one of those moments where I listen back and lean out. I'm just gonna